How's everyone doing? Yeah, that kind of 4 p.m., 4:20, as Elon Musk would be fond to hear. It's extremely exciting to have this session and make it feel like it makes sense. AI talk, discussion at a React conference. Because it feels like there's something in the air here. It feels like we're at an inflection point. These technologies, the majority of us are working with them already. GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT, we all recognize the potential. But I'm so excited about this, I'm skipping your intros. So I am joined by Sean Grove and Sean Swyx, who I would refer to as Swyx. Sean is the founder at OneGraph, acquired by Netlify, where he now works as a principal architect. He has experience not only in JavaScript, GraphQL, many other technologies, but also Rust, Reason, Rescript, and OCaml. And Swyx, you all know him. He's a legend in so many areas. He's worked a lot with React as a DevRel at Netlify back in the day. Has done cloud infrastructure at AWS and Temporal, and served as head of developer experience at Airbyte, where he dove into cloud and data infrastructure. But you probably know him best for his excellent Twitter posts and his writing at dx.tips, or from his new blog and podcast focused on AI, latent space, which I believe is latent.space, the TLD?
It's a cool domain.
Excellent, yeah, excellent domain.
You want to guess how much it was? It was $500, but yeah.
So let's dive into that. Let's dive into this inflection point, because most of us here are front-end devs, but I think we all recognize that something special is happening. So GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT, these technologies are on just a whole different level. So Swyx, you've recently gone all in on AI. But before we get to the current state of the art, can you help us to set some context? Just to give us a little bit of history. How exactly did we get to this point?
Yeah, so we prepped this a little bit, and I sent over some charts. Are we able to put it up on the screen, or?
Sure.
Are we going to?
Can I go full?
Riff it?
Can we get the screen?
Because I feel like this is my way of not having slides. I just kind of tweet out some pictures and try to kind of go from there. And I think everyone needs to have a little bit of sense of AI progress. Yeah, so I think what is important for everyone to know is, or myself to know, which is why I've chosen to go deep on it, is this something I've been watching for a while. And I think it's something that has been in the undercurrent of a lot of the development that we produce. Even in the 1940s and 1950s, the way that Alan Turing thought about his machine was, he was very much thinking about the imitation game, and the Turing test is already in the sort of World War II period, thinking about how machines can imitate humans, think like humans,
sure.
Potentially beat humans, and he successfully did. Arguably contributed to shortening the World War by several years. And I think that amount of progress has just industrialized over the past half century, and it's something that we should put ourselves in historical context and seeing ourselves as part of a larger story. So what I have up here is just a chart. For those who can't see on the screen, it's from Our World in Data. I think it's probably the single best collection of timeline historical charts that you should have a grounding knowledge of. And this charts just first the evolution of compute from large mainframes down to microprocessors and personal computing down to phones, and then artificial intelligence systems from the earliest models up to AlexNet, which is the way that we dove into that we went from traditional machine learning into deep learning, where we basically lose all control of like what is inside of the hidden layers. And then more recently in the 2000s, 10s, and 20s, having human-level benchmarks that each of these models increasingly match and exceed human capabilities on. One of these I really like visually. I actually used to have this up as my Twitter banner for a long, long time. This is the Moore's Law of our era. When Gordon Moore was talking about, RIP by the way, when Gordon Moore was talking about progress for semiconductors, I think what that sort of scale of exponential evolution is happening in generative AI and language models and just reasoning and automated reasoning in general. And you can kind of see that the state of the art over the past 9 years has progressed tremendously, and we now take, as a matter of fact, with a $8 machine Midjourney subscription, something that was completely inconceivable in 2014.
Yeah, I remember the 2017 image there just being blown away. Like,
oh yeah.
As a developer, I was like, I have no idea how you would do that. How would you would manually program that?
Yeah.
And now it's quaint.
Yeah. It's cute. Yeah, yeah.
This person doesn't exist. I think that was blowing up.
Oh yes.
Final chart, because I don't want to turn this into a slide deck. There's an overwhelming amount of research coming out. Even the machine learning researchers are overwhelmed, so don't feel like you're alone or left out. Everyone's trying to figure out how to stay afloat in this journey. But I have more charts, but that's just the brief history of the past few decades.
And not just overwhelmed, as you said, these researchers, these PhDs, these people who have been doing this for decades. Mm-hmm. They apparently don't even understand how these things are working. According to this podcast I'm listening to, it's like mind games. I should have remembered it. But it's a fantastic podcast where they're interviewing people who have been doing these technologies for decades. And they're saying, we still don't understand how they work. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but Sean, can you tell me, you decided to read a research paper every day. What was it, starting last November or so?
In January, yeah.
In January. And so you've been getting a lot into this. So what is your general take on these technologies, LLMs, and basically everything adjacent to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to consider. One is just kind of how useful they are for us even today. And then also, to Sean's point, kind of the rate of change. Mm-hmm. And those are like two separate concerns, but both interesting. The first of which is, things like copilots are pretty magical. I hacked with a friend who visited from out of the States, and he wanted to work on a side project. And I told him, I'm not going to work with you unless you install Copilot. And he's been in, hadn't heard of it, so he installed it.
Yeah.
And it was, the blood left his face. He really, this is amazing. And that is already kind of quaint technology.
Sure.
So kind of the rate at which it's able to help us, and I think we'll see this pop up in a lot of different places. This is kind of one early experiment I did with a PR bot powered by GPT-4.
Do you want to play it? Or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this is like I have this. I get worked whenever I have a PR up and someone asks me, "Hey, can you change something?" And it's like, "Hey, you were right there. Maybe you could have used the suggest a commit button." So in this case, I've changed. This is a contrived demo, but I've gone from expect error to ignore, and there are a lot of other expect errors. And so maybe someone asks me, "Hey, can you change it elsewhere as well?" And so I just wrote a little GitHub bot, and what it does is it gets first crack at any GitHub comment. So in this case, it gets this comment, and then it's going to actually react on that. I chain a couple of prompts together, I go out and I grab all the relevant files, and then it actually provides me with a suggestion. So in this case, it's actually gone through and said, well, I think this is what this person is asking for. And as a human, I'm still involved in a loop, right? I get to say, yeah, this looks good, or not. Maybe I'll go ahead and just implement it myself. But kind of this idea that you can imagine that this is like natural for GitHub to implement inside of their product, right? Like, I suspect that this is going to start popping up in all sorts of places where it already helps automate the job that we do today. And then I think that the next step is kind of like, if you think about, well, how good was Copilot when it first came out? How good is it today? And how good is it going to be next year? Especially if it's kind of combined with some of these automated PR tools and whatnot. I think it has like really big implications as far as how we position ourselves in terms of the skill sets and whatnot.
And this is leveraging the ChatGPT
exactly, yeah.
API.
Yeah.
And just so we're not assuming the level of the audience here, can we talk very briefly about what an LLM actually is?
Yeah.
I mean, well, like I just said, no one understands it, but like the basic principle.
Yeah, so it's the motivation behind the original kind of design of these is incredibly simple. The idea is you're fed a string of like, I want to, and all it's trying to do is guess the next word, or the next token, but we can just say word. And it's actually, initially it was trained off of some fairly large corpus of data, maybe a bunch of Amazon reviews, something along those lines. And it turns out that in order to kind of statistically match the underlying data, and therefore to get a good reward, it actually kind of needs to build an internal model of a lot of different parts of language and also human psychology. So as an example, there's a fantastic blog post from OpenAI in 2017 where they had achieved pretty good, it's kind of GPT-2 times, and they had achieved pretty good text output using this just prediction model. But when they went in to kind of dissect this model, they found out that they actually had a single neuron inside of the model that accurately predicted sentiment. So kind of sentiment analysis, which is a fairly advanced topic in computer science, and it beat all of the state-of-the-art approaches. And so, and they kind of
single neuron. And can you just focus in on that for 1 second? What exactly is a neuron within the context here?
Okay, so large language models are neural networks. So the idea is you have a set of activations, inputs at the top layer. They have weights that connect them to subsequent layers. And so when one gets activated, maybe its connection to the subsequent one is activated at half or double. And this continues for a while. This deep learning is kind of referencing we have lots and lots of these layers. And finally, at the output, it's outputting some results. And then based off of the output, you say, oh, you scored a C or a C+, and you then kind of propagate that back up there and you adjust the weights based off of how well it did. So if you said like, hey, you got an A on this, reward everybody by increasing the current strength.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that.
Yes. So so inside of that, so to your point, they're trying to figure out like why does this work? Why are we able to generate this? And so they overlaid kind of the expected sentiment in like between bright green and bright red. If it's very negative or very very positive, and you can kind of see the sentiment change over the paragraph of say the Amazon reviews. And so it had to learn this concept of sentiment because that helped it actually be much more accurate and get much more reward in the process. So kind of this deeply fascinating thing where without explicitly teaching it about sentiment, it had learned it.
Do you want to pull something up?
Yeah. Is it?
Yeah.
I just wanted to recommend a talk for people to follow. I can't. This is not working.
What's happening?
There is, yeah. Which is, it's interesting.
What do you need to do?
That if you just throw enough data at anything, it eventually solves it. Yeah, so I think there's a talk called Transformers, like long-lived Transformers or something like that, which kind of goes through this evolution in more detail than we have time for.
Yeah, and I suppose the GPT is a transformer model, and it's underlying a lot of these different things. It was a pretty important discovery by Google, I think, in 2015.
And then they open sourced it.
Yeah, they wrote a paper about it. Yeah.
Attention is all you need. Yeah.
Exactly. The title was "Attention is all you need," and it was it's normal in research to publish your papers. In fact, you are strongly encouraged to publish your papers. So people have kind of, I think, unfairly criticized Google for giving this away. Like they didn't realize what it was at the time. Like it seemed to be very effective. Like it's a normal thing to give away.
So how is this, so you showed an interesting example of using this in pull requests. How else is this affecting our lives as developers?
Oh, wow. So many ways. I am actually...
Let's focus in on one.
I'm very obsessed with the ChatGPT code interpreter plugin right now, which I think there's been a few modes of programming in the history of programming. I think we have the text editor, and then we evolved the IDE. Then we had a notebook, the concept of a notebook come along for Python. And I think a lot of us occasionally get sucked into the literate programming world where we want the thing that we work on to also be the living document that is live. The code interpreter plugin is a new type of programming where you are having a conversation with a bot that is working on the program and running it and executing it. And Sean actually has a demo, I think, of where I think his main point is that there's a lot of custom code that we're doing that is essentially just boilerplate, and you could just kind of describe it in natural language, but beyond that, beyond just having the idea, the execution and implementation actually is not very valuable. We could just do that automatically. And something like, I think you have some kind of estimate, like 50% of our code is ephemeral throwaway. And we actually don't do a lot of that work because it would take so much effort. But now that we have a bot to just talk to and produce what we want, that work is going to get done. And I think that's going to unlock a lot of productivity. You can
I'd be happy to show the demo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that Clojure?
Yeah, Clojure, yeah.
Okay.
So the idea behind this demo is, you know,
sound.
No sound. The original motivation is kind of, if you imagine if something like Siri actually worked, how many different UIs do you need at that point? And I say, you know, if you could reliably use Siri, then something like maybe 40% of the UIs that we tend to use, maybe low frequency, would kind of go away.
Could you unpack that a little?
Yeah, so you know, it's like a shopping to-do list or a shopping list, right? A typical thing that we might develop. You know, even Alexa is already kind of reasonably good at saying, hey, add this to my shopping list. So kind of things around there where you kind of set it and forget it, and you need data retrieval for later, or maybe a small factoid or something along those lines. There are a lot of individual one-off apps that just tend to go away. We just don't need them. Or UIs, I should say. You know, APIs remain very important, where it can go and read data or make effects and write to the world. But then there are lots of one-off tasks. So in this case, you know, I'm going to ask and I should say, this is an open source version of the UI of ChatGPT, where you can go in and you can kind of hack it, you plug in your OpenAI key, and then you can pick the model underneath the hood for what you want to actually use. And so in this case, you know, I'm saying, hey, I want an interactive, sortable, searchable table with the top 10 most popular fruits. And this is sped up. That's the only part of this that is not real, because it is very slow. There's a lot of prompts.
We do this in cooking shows, you know, like, ta-da, I already baked for 4 hours.
Ta-da.
You can see here, it actually has written a React-powered app. So it went and found the top 10 most popular fruits, included their nutritional facts. I can search, filter.
So it's creating this entire UI.
Exactly. So it's kind of, you can imagine like maybe a more progressive version of this is where you get some data back, and you realize, you know what, I'm having a hard time kind of visualizing this. Maybe I want to be able to sort of filter it. And it creates a new little UI for you, and you say, well, actually, I also want some pictures, or maybe I want to know, like, give me a map of where they're actually popular. And it kind of creates a UI on the fly, and then remixes itself, kind of modifies itself in place. You either are satisfied with the data, or you know, maybe you're trying to figure out where to fly, or something along those lines. So you achieve the effect. You book the flight, or whatever it might be, and you've done the thing you need to do. This UI has fulfilled its purpose and is released, and it just kind of goes away.
Conjure an ephemeral UI.
Exactly.
So
you
like
thank it for its service, and then you give it away because it sparked joy.
Yeah, and it's you know, it's kind of interesting because, you know, as the cost of creating these UIs actually approaches zero, you get lots of novel UIs that, like, you would feel bad asking someone to make a little weather app that you specifically needed to take part of their life and say, hey, I'm just going to use this for 5 minutes, but can you sit down and write me a React component that does these 5, 6 different things? You think, no, I'll just go and do the manual version. But if the cost of producing these, you know, this is a great example, but if the cost of producing these is close to zero, and that's, you know, like I said, that was sped up, but kind of given the rate of change right now, I think both the speed and the capabilities will be like markedly different, even just next year. And so what you can create and the cost of it just approaches zero. The exception to this, I think, so I would say, you know, the kind of chat interface, the assistant approach, is maybe 40% of UIs go away. Maybe another 50% are kind of created on the fly using some substrate. And there are probably something like 10% that will actually be built the way that we work today, kind of artisanal, handcrafted UIs. You know,
Do you see this for consumers, though? Because oftentimes, as Steve Jobs famously said, customers don't know what they want, right? You want to get them into a funnel, guide them through a process. Do you see that as a speed bump to this beautiful theory of yours?
I suspect that we're already seeing kind of the effect of this with ChatGPT plugins, where actually the interface is that it's making the existing interface like kind of the core, and most of the UI aspects are just controlled by this single window. I think the only cases where we actually have this artisanal hand-built UI, you know, after some number of years, call it 3, 4, 5 years, maybe 10, is where it's a very, very frequently used app, and even a marginal benefit is worth a high investment. So I might think of something like the Bloomberg terminals, where they have custom keyboards and whatnot, because even if it takes you a year to learn this, like that directly translates into more money. But outside of that, there will be some subset of familiar widgets from which like these UIs will be composed of on the fly. You will do your thing and move on.
So you're talking to a number of very senior engineers that work at very respected companies right now. So what do you say to them if we're saying that these technologies, these front ends are going to be entirely written by this? Is the code quality going to be comparable, or does it not matter as long as it works? I
think it's messy. I would probably fall on the size of, so right now, one of the biggest limiting factors is the context window size. So that's kind of what you can put in the prompt. And that's right now, that's the main way that you kind of tweak these models. There are things like fine-tuning and other things you can do, but the way most people are going to consume these models is by kind of hacking the prompts. And so you're really limited by what you can fit in that prompt space. And as those context windows get larger, the capabilities are actually going, I think, to become, they're going to emerge in a non-linear way. They're going to like really, really grow. So in that case, it's like, well, do I actually care about a PR, like what code was actually changed? Maybe what I care about is like, why are you confident, GPT, you wrote this change, why are you confident that this is going to work? So maybe I care about kind of the artifacts that are generated around it, so the visual tests, the unit tests, or whatever might be that like, I'm not maintaining this code anymore. You're maintaining this code. And as long as you can prove to me that this change has achieved what you expect and not some side effect, then I'm fine with it.
So it's all about the outcome. Swyx, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, are there any other tools that we can use to really expand this and go beyond the token limits that you mentioned that are going to expand? Like things like LangChain, are there any other technologies in the landscape that are going to really increase the productivity here and drive this art forward?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. So there are a lot of techniques. Actually, LangChain does, I think, weekly webinars where they gather together the people working on the state of the art of these things, and they do little presentations. Highly recommend them, even though they don't use YouTube. And I'm a YouTube maxi. Everything should be on YouTube. But anyway, that's their choice. But they have techniques around packing of prompts, packing more and more stuff into context. I think ultimately all those things are more or less just short-term improvements on the state of the art, and context will improve over time. GPT, the standard right now is at 4,000. So we're going to 8,000. GPT-4 goes up to 32,000, which they're starting to roll out to people, and I'm very jealous because they don't have access.
There's a paper the other day on RMT, which is kind of
1 million tokens. Yeah.
Up to million.
So eventually it'll just go away, and I think
what will just go away?
This context limitation. Yeah. You would just dump entire.
Yeah, imagine like with Copilot, you just sent over your entire code base on every keystroke. And you're like, hey, what do you think I should type next? Right? Like it would have a much better recommendation versus right now where they have to be very smart about what they send over.
And where is this source coming from?
So if you're using Copilot, but right now what they do is they're very cleverly trying to figure out like what should we send over to the LLM in order to ask for a recommendation. And what if they didn't have to be clever and they could just send over the 200 most recent files?
So we're talking about GitHub Copilot in particular.
Exactly. Okay. So this is not what they're working on, I don't think, but you can imagine a world where they have access to this, right? These models have progressed, and probably relatively soon, and so the quality of prediction then probably goes up significantly better. It's like if you had great memory of all 200 files at any given time.
Yeah. For reference, if anyone doesn't know, Copilot has been reversed to some extent. So someone actually decompiled the VS Code extension. So you can actually kind of look through what they send. They send over 20 files.
They reverse engineered it and open sourced it? Is that what you said?
Reverse engineered it. We're not sure about the open sourcing and the licensing and all that, but it's out there if you want to see it. It's 20 files. It's not 200 files. Therefore, Copilot doesn't have full visibility of your code base, and eventually it will. And we should hope for that future, live for it. I'm actually, my podcast today just released the model from Replit, where they do have a pretty significant understanding of your code base. I don't actually know how they do it. They don't talk about it. But it seems to be a better implementation than Copilots, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and for such a small team, and things are moving so quickly, so even small teams.
2 people train that large language model. It's very accessible.
Yeah, so I actually think that's like part of the message today. Is like the skill sets we have, they're valuable today, but they will change radically in a short period of time. But it's also really exciting. So it's kind of terrifying in some ways, right? It's hard to know how to keep up. On the other hand, like it's really exciting because small teams can do so much.
It seems to me that it's not necessarily the changing in technologies that you need to that you need to be versed in, but it's the velocity that I think is scaring people. The pace of the change is just so fast, and things are happening so quickly that you see one thing on Twitter, and then the next week it's old news.
Yep. There was a pause letter, by Digger and Elon Musk on it saying, hey, we should pause for 6 months. And the joke is that actually that was just everyone working in machine learning saying, hey, we need a vacation. Like, we just need a pause. We just need a break.
It seemed to me more like it was, we want the competitive advantage.
No, you could
Facebook calling to be regulated for all social networks.
Yeah, you could imagine something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think about that?
The pause letter?
The pause letter, yeah.
Complete joke.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
It wasn't never going to work. Everyone signing it knew it wasn't going to work. It's just a PR stunt.
Mm.
I think in particular, so one way that people are looking at these models is and the capabilities that emerge. So one thing that's interesting is kind of emergent behavior, where so Google has its new model PaLM, and they have 3 different sizes: 8 billion parameters, 60 billion parameters, and 560 billion parameters. What they found is that on some tasks it was not very good at 8, it was not very good at 60 billion, and at 560 billion it was suddenly great. And another one where it was not very good at 8, it was suddenly very good at 60, and not much better at 560. And kind of naively, I mean, from my point of view, I was surprised because you kind of expect maybe a linear improvement. But it seems like at one point these models get big enough to actually incorporate some new fact, some new model, and so they get suddenly better. But then there's an alternative, which is chinchilla models, where you train on less data for much longer, and they're actually getting fantastic results. So you can imagine in this, the letter calling to pause things was saying, hey, no runs on models larger than GPT-4. But in that case, a lot of energy is going to go into extracting much more value out of the models that we already have.
Sure, and something like that is impossible to enforce, or even police.
It's very difficult to even specify what you mean.
Exactly. Yeah. Interesting. So how do we keep a positive message here? What do we tell people that are fearful of their jobs? What is the future of software engineering? Not just front-end engineering, but software engineering. Ultimately, the structure of how we ship product, how we deliver value to the market. Is everything changing? Is this going to be a paradigmatic shift that we look back and say that was the moment that it all changed?
Is that on me? Okay, all right.
It's open. I was looking at you when I said it.
So a few points. One, many of us currently hold jobs that did not exist 10 years ago. We will hold jobs that will be created in the next 10 years because the human creativity and desire for more things, faster, better, cheaper, freer, open sourcer is infinite. And no matter how much capacity we throw into machines to replace all that, we will want more. And two, I think one of my favorite quotes about technology, how I think about technology, is that civilization advances by the number of operations that we can do without thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And that's Alfred North Whitehead. He said that in, I think, the 40s, and it still holds true today. So we just, as long as we solve this tier of abstraction, we kind of go higher. And I think, last one, I'll have a carve-out for UI and React people. To the extent that all this GPT stuff is replacing jobs, it's actually replacing back-end jobs. When a lot of times you can just kind of, so a lot of the discovery of people implementing these things in production systems is that you can actually just kind of have GPT kind of mock a backend without actually writing any implementation of it whatsoever. That's the project is called Backend is All You Need, and it won the Scale AI hackathon recently. Okay. But so people would differentiate based on...
Not Googleable easily?
Sorry?
Not Googleable easily on stage? Just a hackathon project?
Yeah, you just type backend is all you need for GPT. I know it's a super long name, but it was a hackathon project. They didn't come up with anything else.
This is a 2019 MacBook keyboard, so I dare not type on it.
But I think there is a space for AI UX, is what I'm calling it. We had a meetup at Notion HQ a couple weeks ago, and there will always be demand for more human interfaces to these machines, to these God, omnipotent creatures. We need to sort of give affordances to these new paradigms that let us control them and align them the way that we do things the way that we want them to be done. Chat is just the beginning. There will be more ways to interact with these.
I think about it a little bit differently. So, I think it's reasonable to be nervous about the how are we going to be able to contribute value. But I think the best way is to push forward, not kind of hold back.
Sure.
And so if I enumerate all of the things that I think I'm skilled at and I'm able to contribute value in, my approach has been using these tools, which are really like cheat codes. It's just I've been able to build such fun things, is to try to automate all of my skills, try to make myself obsolete. And kind of in the process of that, it requires that you think differently, that you kind of move up one level of abstraction. You no longer have to think about the actual code, maybe underlying your PR or whatever. Not that we're there today, but you can imagine at that state, maybe society has progressed forward to some degree, right? We no longer need to think about that, the actual code. We can think about the actual observable changes. So I've been, and kind of in that process, as you try to automate your own skill set, as you use these tools and try to learn how they work together, you discover new things that you can do. And it's incredibly energizing. So
I was just on that point. I was trying to find a tweet from Nader Dabit, who was talking about the positivity around these technologies. And he says, I put out a YouTube video just showing, he built something simple with these technologies. And he said, I got like 10 job offers. People asked me to come and train and come and speak and do all these things. And he's like, just work with these technologies and put something out there, and you're going to be fine. Yeah, so really. I think if people are worried, then to your point, work with the damn stuff, automate yourself, help others automate others, and then we just elevate everyone together.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of to that point, I've done a lot of different hacks and whatnot. And I read a paper on the reflection technique, and the breadth of machine learning papers right now is huge. So there's some stuff from Google where they're talking about their 560 billion parameter LLM and how they scaled it using custom TPUs with optical. It's just incredibly intense engineering, and they get a 7% performance increase across the tests. And another one called the reflection technique, where you ask the model for an answer, and then you say, do you think that was a good answer? And it's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to improve it. And that gets you 12% performance increase. So the breadth of papers is just surprising, where even something as simple as this gets a name and actually
a paper.
A paper. Yeah.
A lot of citations. Yes.
So this is a little project where I like talks, but maybe I don't like writing them or even giving them. So I wrote a little thing where I can kind of give the abstract of a talk and also describe an audience. And in the process of it, there's an author GPT bot and an audience GPT bot. And the author comes up with brainstorms, an outline, and then starts writing the paper, or writing the talk. But it has to pass it to the audience talk, who is kind of, it says, hey, you're a React-a-thon audience member, you have these skill sets, you're interested in these kind of things. And so whenever the author hands it over, the audience will actually critique it and say, well, it'd be more interesting if you did this, I prefer this.
Yeah.
And so the author bot is not allowed to progress until the audience bot has become satisfied with this. And they just go through this, and then eventually there's the whole thing is done. And that has to be approved by the audience bot. And so you can see here that it's actually incorporated. So the author bot has incorporated the feedback from the audience bot, in this case, kind of automatically. And you can see at this point, the audience bot is happy. It says, all right, I accept this bit. You may proceed to the next bit of the talk. And so this goes on for a while. It's using GPT-4.
Also, this is real time. It's going back and forth.
Exactly. And I would also kind of caution anyone, if you've used GPT 3.5, GPT-4 is an entirely different beast in terms of what it's capable of. Yeah. It is orders of magnitude better, I would argue. All right, so in this case, it has accepted the talk, it's happy with it, and then it gets to the next part, which is, maybe I actually
Hello, fellow React enthusiasts.
I don't want to actually give the talk, so I use the tool to generate my voice.
It's a pleasure to be here with such a diverse group of developers, ranging from the I just heard about React last week to the I literally invented React type. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm a tech speaker who loves development as much as I love a good dad joke.
So you sound like the Mark Zuckerberg version of Sean Grove, and
more
this bot
charismatic
version.
Yeah.
Yes, the idea is like this, all I did was describe the talk in the audience. It wrote everything and then generated my voice. And it's nowhere near 100% perfect at all right now. Like, there's still a human edge to this, but it's only going to get better from here.
Yeah.
And this is like, I did this before the Drake and the Weeknd song that went viral throughout the internet. So it's probably significantly less.
Just needed a trap beat.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
Well, so my reductionist take on what you just done is you have rediscovered pair programming, which is I like that there's something surprisingly human about how what these learnings have been in dealing with language models, because a lot of them are just like good parenting, good executive communication, and good pair programming.
Yeah. So, and it's actually kind of interesting because when we talk about like prompt engineering, which I think is a slightly silly term, but what's kind of happening in that, where you ask a question, you get a result back that's not quite what you want, and you iterate through it, you're actually kind of clarifying your own thought. Like, what is it that you want, and you're locking down the specification, which is generally the difficult part of programming. It's like kind of concisely expressing all of the restrictions and the goals.
Yeah.
It's almost like a mix between engineering and writing, though, because writing also helps you to clarify your thought process and help you think. I think, was it you that wrote an article about writing to help you think?
Yeah. Well, many people. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, that's a well-known concept.
Yeah. So for those people in the audience who want to go deeper on this, the way that you talk about this in machine learning lingo is that you're externalizing the internal sequence of thoughts. And so there are many patterns that have been discovered that cover this. Let's think step by step is the first one of them. Like are you sure is all you need is my reductive explanation of that reflection paper that you talked about. But really, like, I don't know. Basically, I think the most important paper that people should think about actually is the Cicero paper from Meta, where they basically beat diplomacy players. Diplomacy is a 7-player natural language political war game that is fought between human and now AI players, where you can lie and promise and negotiate and bargain and do all sorts of stuff, but then you sort of try to beat human players at that, Noam Brown actually beat humans. And his insight was that you actually, people have been overemphasizing pre-training and inference time, pre-training and training time. And you can actually get something on the order of 10,000 times the performance if you, for every second of time that you spend in inference time. So essentially, instead of spending all the time in just running your pre-trained model, spending more time in the inference by doing things like externalizing your chain of thought. And I think that insight is actually really good, and it maps the human intuition that, hey, you should, in order to know what you think, you should write it out. And then based on what you've just written out, you can then self-critique it instead of having to do all that in a single step internally inside of your head.
Yeah. You've both been thinking about this for a decent amount of time, relatively speaking to I would just venture a guess, the majority of people in this room. How are you planning the next 5 years of your career? Or the next 2? I don't know. Whatever timeline you want. The future for Swyx and Sean.
Yeah.
How are you planning?
Right now, just reading a lot and talking to a lot of people in the space. I have moved to San Francisco against my will in order to immerse, because I do think that there is a very strong centralizing force both in machines and in humans where AI is concerned. I am tinkering with a lot of side projects and hoping to start a company of my own in that space, but don't have anything to plug or share. I do think that learning in public which is the sort of technique that I am known for, that I adopted from Kelsey Hightower and others before him, is a very good learning strategy for literally anything, and I'm doing that with what I'm doing now. And by being relatively open with my notes and by being able to talk and amplify other people as they work on this field, I think I'm learning faster than I could on my own, and I encourage other people to do the same.
Yeah, and your work is not just found on your new blog, Latent Space, your new podcast, Latent Space, but it's also on GitHub. You have the Swyx Brain.
Yes.
Right, yeah. So that's all open source. So
Yeah.
you've basically taken that commercial open source idea and just, well, you haven't commercialized that.
Yeah,
well,
no.
yet, anyway. Greatest Swyx LLM. Chat with Swyx anytime.
No, I think, yeah, I think there's, what's important as well, like, there's just way too much for a single person to cover, even for someone who, like, I'm full-time on this right now. So I think you should focus on topic areas which you think have high potential, or you have high affinity to just based on your prior backgrounds, and just focus on that, and be okay with the fact that you are not going to be state-of-the-art on the other stuff, but just, yeah, choose a domain, plant a flag.
All right.
Yeah, I think I would think about it slightly differently. I think the reading is extremely important, just to get a sense of the breadth, but also going deep and build. Like,
yes.
I would just emphasize build.
Yeah.
And this stuff it's like a cheat code. You know, I built one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to journal. I have terrible self-discipline, and so like I know I'm not going to be able to make myself sit down and write out my thoughts kind of on a white piece of paper. And so I built a little GPT bot using Whisper where I can actually just talk to it.
And Whisper, just for those who don't know?
Oh, so Whisper is another open source model that OpenAI released that is state of the art at turning speech into text. And you can also, there's like a React component called Use Whisper, I believe, which is great. And literally you just put it in and you can now talk to your app. And
this is much better than your
browser speech. There's a speech recognition API in the browser.
Yeah,
no one's using it.
Yeah, this thing is phenomenal, and I actually think it can get even better with some manual hacks. But you know, I initially built this journaling tool, and I had it kind of ask me about my day, and I would just talk to it, and it would ask me questions. And then I realized actually there was kind of a therapeutic side to it that I really liked, so I modified the prompt, and then I was kind of surprised. I had a hard time demoing it because I would record a video, and then it would ask me a question. I'd be like, oh, that's a good question. I guess I'm not sure how I feel about such and such.
Yeah.
And then be like, well, I can't share that. So, and then you know, and then you find like all these. I didn't set out to build this thing, but eventually I realized I could have it create a profile of me. So at the end of every conversation, I say like, here's the profile you created yesterday. Can you update it with facts about me, things you should remember, and I'll give this to you tomorrow. And so now it knows things about my marriage and my children and my activities and whatnot. And it asked me things like, hey, have you followed through on this? And I'm really excited to get access to the...
I think you're losing your mic, sorry. Just squeeze that a little.
I'm really excited to get access to the multimodal GPT-4 where you can also have images.
Quick description for those who missed that.
So these models right now are text in, text out. They are very rapidly going to be anything in, anything out. So images in, audio in, text in, similarly, images out, audio out. And as soon as I get that, I want to hook it up. I'm not saying this is something I would sell to other people or other people should do this, but I want to hook it up to my Apple Photos so I can see the pictures of my day, maybe the Spotify, what I'm listening to. And it can kind of ask me about it and say, hey, I noticed that you're spending more time with this person, or did you feel like you were present at that time? And just by building one piece, I suddenly realized, oh, it'd be really nice if it could do this. And the building has led me to explore more and more about these and become more enthusiastic about using them.
Yeah. For those who want access, I recommend checking out Mini GPT-4, which is someone took the Blip model, which is a image encoder, and wired it up to, I think, a Llama text model. So you kind of have it, but it's not as good as GPT-4 itself.
These models are also fantastic. Like, it's just been so fun. Like, I built a little thing where I asked GPT-4 to give me a random topic. I then used that to generate a random image in Midjourney. And then I used their API to describe what's in that image. And then I sent that image over to I have the ChatGPT plugin, and say like, or sorry, the description. And I said, all right, based off of this description of image, please write me a poem in English and French. And then I overlaid the two with nice typography, and every minute or 2 minutes, it just cycles on an art frame. And it's kind of like art that's just created, experienced once, and then just goes away.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was like 3 hours of hacking.
Yeah. Amazing.
It's really fun.
Well, we are out of time. This has been such a fantastic conversation. I'm so honored to have both of you here. Can we please give it up for Swyx and Sean Grove, everyone?
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.